this is the point where I get to say hello and thank you for joining us. And thank you, Darian. I'm so glad you could be here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Okay, great. So, folks, I want to tell you, Darian Rodriguez Heyman is an incredible person and has an amazing amount of expertise in fundraising. He has had some wonderful experiences in the past and continues to do amazing things and covers and doing good for so many different organizations and different people who are the benefactors. So Darian has, as you can see in his bio, he has been the executive director at Craigslist Foundation. Currently, he is the executive director at the NUMMI Foundation. There's a link there if you want to check out his foundation. He's also, as I mentioned, he is a speaker. I've seen him speak multiple times. He also founded Social Media for Nonprofits, which I've been a big fan for years. And he's also a best-selling author. So he's got all of those bases covered. And the books that he has written are Nonprofit Management 101 and Nonprofit Fundraising 101, but he'll get to that, I think, in a second as well. So in any case, delighted to have you because, Darian, the thing, no matter what role we play in our nonprofit organizations, ultimately we need to be able to raise funds and bring money in the door in order for us to accomplish our mission. So that being said, please enlighten us, show us the way, tell us other ways, new ways that we can make sure that we are maximizing our efforts for the optimum benefit. With that, I will mute myself and take it away, Darian.
Great. Thanks, Amy, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Really excited to be with you. And my name is Darian Rodriguez Heyman. I'll be a presenter for the next hour. And my hope and my intention for this workshop is that you leave not only inspired, but really inspired to action, meaning, my goal is to give you some tips and some tools that you can put to work immediately that are going to enable and empower you to raise more money for your cause. So that's very much why I'm here. One just housekeeping item I do want to share is that unlike most presenters that sort of ask you to wait until the very end of a workshop to ask your questions in a Q&A forum, I'm really comfortable fielding questions throughout the program. So please, if anything that I say is not crystal clear or if you have questions about how it relates to you and to your organization, by all means, feel free to use the chat functionality of the app, and I'll do my best to integrate those answers into the workshop itself. So with that said, let's dive into it. And really what I wanted to do today with the Top 7 Fundraising Tips workshop was kind of share a grab bag of some specific, salient, really powerful and effective and yet fairly easy to implement tips that can very quickly help you raise more money for your cause and do it across 7 different disciplines. So we'll look at foundations, we'll look at getting your board to contribute and fundraise more, we'll look at individual donors, online giving, and more. You already heard from Amy a little bit about my background. I have been working in the social impact field for 20 years and really got my start as the executive director of Craigslist Foundation, where I started their nonprofit boot camp program, a one-day conference focused on all aspects of running a successful nonprofit. That was an amazing experience for 5 years and really where I discovered my life's work and my passion around helping people help. So what I do in general, professionally, is that I work with nonprofit leaders, with fundraisers, with environmental leaders and CEOs of mission-led businesses, people who want to make the world a better place, and I connect them to the best practices, helpful resources, and contacts that they need to maximize impact. So that's something I've been doing for 20 years. After I left the foundation, I wrote my first best-selling book, which was Nonprofit Management 101, and then more recently released my new book, also a bestseller called Nonprofit Fundraising 101. And both of those are incredibly comprehensive and yet really, really practical. And what I've done today is really lifted some tips from the various chapters in Nonprofit Fundraising 101, which has sections devoted to foundation fundraising, corporate giving, individual donors, online, earned income, you name it, and tried to kind of pull out a couple specific tips that you can put to work immediately and that you will hopefully find helpful. And then the final project I should mention that is going on currently in California. We do 2 events a year, potentially expanding to Chicago and to DC next year, is the Nonprofit Fundraising Masters Conference Series, where I interview some of the world's most successful nonprofit fundraisers and share their insights and inspiration with a live audience. And Amy and our friends at TopNonprofits have been a really critical partner for that series. So with that said, let's get into the meat of today's presentation. And I wanted to start with something that I think is pretty important, because if you look at the numbers, there was a study done about 10 years ago by a group called Compass Point that showed that actually half of nonprofit executive directors leave not only their jobs, but the sector within 5 years. And the number one reason why nonprofit leaders kind of burn out is because of all the fundraising responsibility. And number two is frustrations with their board. And what I've discovered over the last 20 years in working with hundreds, if not thousands of nonprofits, is that when you put the two of those together and you explore the topic of getting your board to fundraise, getting your board to contribute, that can be an incredibly vexing proposition for many nonprofits. And I've seen a lot of groups stumble with this, especially smaller groups that have found some success where they're trying to transition a working board into a fundraising and strategic board. And, you know, that can be very difficult, but the good news is over the last 20 years, I've sort of encountered two specific documents that are really powerful tools that can help gracefully usher in that transition. And I do have templates of these that I'm happy to email out to everyone for free if you want to shoot me a tweet at my Twitter handle on the upper right, or I'll be sharing my personal email and mobile phone at the end of the workshop today. So those tools, and again, I can send out the templates if anybody wants them, are what are known as a board matrix and a board member agreement. And I'll show some examples and also talk through them in a bit more detail, but the top line in terms of the value of these tools, a board matrix is a really powerful tool for taking inventory of your board, for also having a collective conversation around what kind of board members you need to recruit, and then also ultimately the output of this exercise is getting your board in to consensus around what are your top priorities for board recruitment. We'll look at that in just a second. And the other tool we'll look at, again, is the board member agreement. And this is basically just a job description that creates really straightforward expectations, that creates accountability, and it also clarifies what the fundraising expectations are associated with being a board member. So let's get into it. The first tool, as I mentioned, is the board matrix. And the idea here is really there's a couple things. Number one, it's a tool that facilitates a conversation that ideally is board-led, you know, with staff contributing around, you know, hey, 10 years from now, let's say that we have fulfilled our potential. We are meeting our mission. We are doing the absolute best work possible, and this organization is functioning at full capacity and impact. In that scenario, what does our ideal board look like? What are the different characteristics that our board would need to have in place in order to fulfill its potential? And really, you are thinking about those characteristics in three different buckets: expertise and capacity. Expertise would be, you know, we work with indigenous communities, so we need someone that has indigenous wisdom. We also want an accountant or a lawyer or someone with fundraising experience or nonprofit governance. And then capacity would be more their personal capacity. They have a lot of money they could contribute. They have time, etc. Connections, pretty straightforward, but you know, we need people with connections to celebrities, to major donors, to foundations, etc. And then diversity is all about the need to represent the community that you serve. And you could think about different ethnicities, LGBT, gender balance, age. If you're a group that serves youth, maybe you should have someone under 30 on the board. If you serve the homeless, maybe you should have a formerly homeless person or formerly incarcerated person on the board, if that's your focus, whatever the case may be. And so the idea is you kind of have a brainstorming exercise. You put things into these three buckets. Ideally, you kind of pare down the list so you're really focusing on the characteristics that are most important, keeping it to about 20 at the most. And that, sort of goal setting is helpful in and of itself. But then what you do is you have the current board members' names at the top of each column, and at a future board meeting, once the list is finalized, you just have people check off the boxes under their name that are appropriate. I am Latino, I have fundraising experience, I have foundation connections, etc. Right? And that really, really quickly helps you take inventory around what do we have and what do we need. Really powerful tool. And the output of this tool, just to be really clear, is that next time you're out in the community and you're having lunch with some really well-networked person, instead of finishing an update on your work and saying, hey, Bob, we're actually looking to expand the board, and I'm curious to know, do you know anybody who might be passionate about the issues we focus on that might be an appropriate board candidate? Maybe he thinks of someone, maybe he doesn't. As opposed to, if you finish that same conversation, that same meeting, and at the end of the meeting you tell Jane, hey Jane, thanks so much for your interest in our work. We are actually in the process of expanding our board, and I'm curious, do you happen to know any Latina lawyers in San Francisco with good corporate connections? Right? And the likelihood, the odds of that person sharing a candidate or two, and in particular sharing a candidate or two that meet the key characteristics you're most looking to recruit for right now, goes up exponentially, right? And so this really, because after everyone sort of checks the boxes off under their name, then you can have a very straightforward conversation about, hey, gosh, we don't have anybody who, has spirituality and faith expertise, and we also don't have any high net worth individuals on the board, and we've only got one person who has foundation connections, and we've identified that as a key priority in the next couple of years. So the point is, you're identifying the 3 or the 4 characteristics that are your top priority to recruit for. Really, really helpful tool that enables the board to come to consensus around what you have, what you need, and what your top priorities for recruitment are. So that's a great tool to sort of take inventory and expand the board. But the board member agreement, as I said, is more of a job description. It's about creating accountability and helping to get the board on board with the reality that fundraising and contributing is part of their job. And so the idea here is that typically the framing for this document, which once again needs to be board-led, you can't just impose this on the board and expect that to go well. Thanks for all the work you've done, and now we're changing the requirements. Hey, wait a minute, that's a bait and switch. As opposed to, thanks to all of your leadership and your support, we've gotten to a point where now we're taking our efforts to the next level. We have the money to bring on the staff now, and the needs of our organization as it relates to the board are evolving. And so let's talk about exactly what it means to be a board member. And usually nonprofits have something in their bylaws or some kind of document that is buried, in a 500-page orientation packet that includes minutes and bylaws and all this other stuff, but nobody reads it, and if they do, they don't remember it. As opposed to that, a board member agreement is a 1 to 2 page document. So really, really concise. It's written in very plain English. It is a contract, meaning every board member should sign it and alongside the board chair, right? And the idea is it's written in very objective language. It's intended to be black or white because you want to avoid miscommunication. You want to avoid saying something like, as a board member of TopNonprofits, I commit to make a good faith effort to attend all board meetings. Well, I had a baby this year, I was sick, I moved, I changed jobs, so I made it to 1 board meeting, and I thought that was pretty good, but Amy feels like I'm dead weight, right? And neither of us is right because we have no objective basis or criteria, as opposed to this document saying, I commit to attend 75% of all board meetings. I commit to contribute 5 hours a month of my time pro bono to the organization's work. I commit to, etc., right? And all of those things should be yes or no, and it's a board-led conversation with contribution from the staff and especially the executive director around what those criteria are. What does the organization need to fulfill its potential and to move forward with this exciting new chapter of its development? And from a fundraising standpoint, which is typically the real goal of the implementation of this document, it's kind of like putting the pill in the cheese to get the dog to take its medicine. You're framing this conversation in a much broader way about the needs of the organization have evolved, and as we step into the next stage of our development, creating some accountability and clarity of roles and a purpose is going to be really critical, especially if we're recruiting new board members. Because whether they ask it or not, they're going to want to know what it means to be a board member, and some ad hoc email or conversation is just not going to cut it once you start trying to recruit higher-end board members. Right? And so from a fundraising standpoint, what I like to include, and it's in the template that I can email out, are three things. The one most important one is around a personal financial contribution, right? And the idea here is that, typically the way that I get boards to accept this is that as we enter the next stage of our development and we start going after bigger funding opportunities, in particular, grants from foundations and companies, one of the questions that we will be asked, according to this, author, webinar expert guy that I just listened to, is what is your board participation in fundraising? Your board participation, and that is defined as what percentage of your board gives. And I'll tell you right now that the right answer is 100%, and the wrong answer is anything less than that. Because if your entire board isn't supporting your work, then why should I support it, right? So it's critical that you have 100% board participation, and therefore I strongly recommend against a give-get target, which is kind of common, because there's really two main reasons. One is just because I get my friends or my company or whoever else to give should never let me off the hook for contributing personally. Every board member must make a personal contribution every year to the organization. And number two, if you have a give-get requirement and you sort of require the same financial contribution from every board member, well, then let's say you do bring on a 25-year-old, young leader to the board, and that $1,000 contribution level is going to be really tough for her to make, as opposed to you also have a lawyer who's a billionaire, and he's getting off easy by just writing a $1,000 check when he could write $1 million check, right? And so instead, what I really encourage you to do, and have found to be a best practice, is to require what is called a personal capacity gift. And a personal capacity gift is defined as the largest gift you can comfortably make every year. Could be one time, could be spaced out over time. It's subjective. You decide what's the most you're comfortable giving, but it is, a stretch gift. And it's also defined as one of your top 3 philanthropic investments of the year. If you're giving more money to 5 other groups, then you should probably be on their board, right? And with that very simple framework, and again, that language is in the template I can send out, now all of a sudden you can very quickly get to not only 100% board participation, but, you are also getting people to sort of stretch and donate as much as possible every year. So that's the first and probably most important requirement that should be in this document. The second one, which is equally critical, is that, fundraising is not just about your personal contribution, it's about you opening up your Rolodexes. And so I like to put something in there that says, every year I will facilitate introductions to, pick a number, 5 potential sponsors, donors, and funders. Right? That could be inviting people to our annual event. It could be making an introduction to a foundation and setting up a lunch, whatever it is. But you're going to open up some doors. And then usually I'll include a bit more of a generic kind of nebulous line in there about, and the third one is that I also agree to be a proactive ambassador and evangelist for the cause and just seek out funding opportunities in general. Right? But with that simple framework, all of a sudden you've got everybody giving to the best of their capacity and also engaged in helping support the fundraising efforts. And the one thing that I do just want to caution you on when it comes to getting your board involved in fundraising is remember that not every board member is going to be comfortable making an ask. And that needs to be okay. If you try to force them into doing that, it's not going to go well. You could certainly give them tools and template emails and things like that, but ultimately if someone doesn't want to be an asker, that's okay. They can still be an advocate or an ambassador. They can still, everyone needs to be engaged in the fundraising process from a standpoint of opening doors, stewarding existing donors and saying thank you, building those relationships, right? But thinking that fundraising is only about the ask is like saying dating is only about the proposal for marriage. It's the point of culmination, but it's not all it's about. So that's just a couple quick tips on getting your board engaged in fundraising and contributing. Now let's jump over to foundation fundraising, because this is something that in my experience I have found a lot of nonprofits have had big difficulties here. And when I travel around the world, and especially in the U.S., and I ask nonprofits how many of them write grants, I don't see that many hands go up. And then if I ask how many of you have experimented and tried to go after foundation funding, but decided it wasn't worth it for you, I see a lot of hands go up. And in short, the reason why that happens is because people are doing it wrong. In my book, what you should have a 50% success rate, meaning half of the grants that you submit should be approved. And if you have a lower success rate than that, it's because I would say you're not doing it right. And there's one of two things happening. There's really three scenarios, sort of bad, better, and best. And bad is basically spray and pray, cookie cutter. You create one proposal and then just send it out to anybody and everybody. Your odds of success are well under 1% in that scenario, and it's kind of a big waste of time, right? Most nonprofits, though, are in the better bucket, where they have about a 5% success rate, where they are actually going out there doing research, they're identifying some really viable prospects whose goals philanthropically overlap with their nonprofit's work, and then they're writing really wonderful proposals that are customized to those organizations, and they're sending them in and just sort of crossing their fingers and hoping, and they're hoping that they get a grant. And it's basically a lottery ticket. About 5% of the time they'll get it, but it's not a great return on investment, right? And what's interesting is there's not too much of a change to get from better to best, to get from a 5% success rate to a 50% success rate. And it all starts with one simple cardinal rule in my book, which is that you should never crash a party. You should never show up to a party you haven't been invited to, or put in the framework of foundation fundraising, you should never submit a cold grant. You should never submit a grant you haven't been invited to apply for, right? Now, that's going to limit the number of opportunities that you actually apply for, but the likelihood of you succeeding is going to go up exponentially. And just to be clear, similar to getting invited to a party, if I tell you I'm having a party, and you want to come, that's great, but you need to know what's the date, what should I wear, do I need to bring anything, etc. And similarly, there are a couple additional pieces of information, all that take place under the umbrella of getting invited to apply, that are what is going to get you up to 50%. So, for example, if you're at a conference and all of a sudden the panel, ends and you have an opportunity to speak to this head of grant making. They're a program officer, which is kind of foundation speak for the person who oversees giving in a particular programmatic area like education or the arts or healthcare, right? So if they get off the stage, you run up and, hand her your business card and you give her your little 30-second elevator pitch, and she says, wow, that sounds great, get me a proposal. That's wonderful. And you are definitely better than 5% because you got that invitation, but you're not quite at 50 yet. Because, again, there's a couple additional pieces of information that you need. So in that scenario, instead of just saying, sure, of course, I'd be happy to, thank you so much, what I would say is, of course, I'd be happy to get you a proposal. I do have a couple quick questions I'd love to ask you first, though. Could we set up a 15 or a 20-minute call next Thursday afternoon? right? And in that meeting, in that call, the pieces of information that I would be looking for are kind of the who, what, when, where, why, how, right? Filling in all the blanks of the party that I want to go to. So again, everything takes place underneath the context, the umbrella of getting invited to apply. But the first thing you want to figure out is exactly what you should be applying for and why, right? The idea here is that every nonprofit has a wide range of what I would call fundables. And by fundables, I mean anything you're looking for money for. And that includes, of course, first and foremost, general operating support, but it also includes each of your individual programs and initiatives. And I would also add the sort of ideas, that hopefully you and your board have discussed, and everybody is sort of in agreement that, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could? That would really advance our mission and take our efforts to the next level if we could blank, right? But so there's those kinds of ideas that you know are on target, but you just don't have the resources for it. So those ideas are also fundables, right? So anything that you could conceivably look for money for is a fundable, and you want a really compelling, concise, and credible 30 to 60-second pitch, an elevator pitch for each of those fundables. And it should absolutely be impact-oriented and really speak to the need in the community that you're looking to address. You don't need to go into all the details about how you're going to do that, but at a top line, here's the big picture problem, here's the solution, and at a top line, here's what we want to do about it. That's your elevator pitch for each of those fundables. And when you start out the meeting with a call with the foundation executive, there may be a little bit of small talk. The next step of the conversation is what's known as Appreciative Inquiry, where you're going to be learning a little bit more about their efforts and ideally getting a better sense of what motivates their giving, of how they think about their giving and why they're committed to this particular cause and what their strategy is within the program area that you're trying to apply for funding within, so that once you have that context, then you can dive into your elevator pitches. And odds are you're not going to pitch every single thing, every single fundable, because some of them are not going to be appropriate, but maybe out of the 6 or 7 pitches, you're going to share 3 or 4, right? And that's when you're doing what I call the pasta test. And guys, if you remember when you were in college, first learning how to cook, you'd throw the spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks, and then you know it's done. Well, that's sort of what we're doing with this stage of the conversation. We're throwing these elevator pitches at the wall to see if they stick, to see if they resonate. And in an ideal world, after we do these 3 or these 4 rapid-fire pitches, and then we kind of pause, ideally that program officer is going to say, well, gosh, I'm really interested in the work of your organization as a whole, because clearly we are both committed to working with the most vulnerable populations in our community. And I also think your vocational training program is right down the strike zone for us because of, your focus on helping people help themselves, right? Something like that is an ideal response. It may be the case that you finish your elevator pitches, that pasta test is done, you throw up the jazz hands, and there's crickets, there's silence. In which case you may have to prompt them and say, based on our research, we felt pretty strongly that each of these initiatives and programs would really be, right up your alley from a funding standpoint. What do you think? Right? So you may have to explicitly put the ball in their court, but either way, when you get this response, you're listening for 2 things, the what and the why, the programs and the positioning. So what you're listening for in this example I just shared is they express an interest in funding our organization as a whole, in general operating support, and they express an interest in our vocational training program. But almost equally as importantly, the reason, the rationale behind why they said that general operating support was of interest was because of our shared focus on our community's most vulnerable populations. You are writing those exact words down in your notes because you better believe that they're going to appear in your proposal. And in my experience, when they use that kind of language, and they rationalize why this fundable is a fit, they are probably using language that is used internally to govern their grant-making decisions, but you're not going to find it on their website or in their annual report. So you want to write that down. You want to write down vocational training and helping people help themselves, because all of that is going into your proposal. So now we've got an invitation to apply for a specific program or set of programs with the rationale behind each. And the final thing, a couple more things that we're going to ask. Number one is that you need to ask for the dollar amount for each individual thing that they've expressed an interest in funding. Oh, thank you so much for your interest in providing much-needed general operating support. Our goal over the next year is to expand our services from serving 5,000 homeless veterans this year to over 20,000 next year. And with your support, we're confident we can make that happen. Our budget next year is $2 million. Do you think a general operating support grant of $500,000 would be realistic, or would a $250,000 request be more appropriate given that we'd be a first-time grantee? Question mark, pause. Right? It's not an ask if it doesn't end in a question mark. And I would add a pause, because after you make an ask, they need to be the next person that speaks. Right? And odds are, you'll give them a range. They're probably going to come back to you with a range. Oh gosh, even $250K would be well over what we'd be able to support something like this with. I would say probably more in the $100,000 range, maybe as much as $150,000. Great. If they give you a range, the only number you're writing down in your notes is the number on the high end of that range, because that's what your ask is going to be for. $150K for general operating support because of our shared focus on supporting the community's most vulnerable populations. And then you're going to repeat the same conversation about every fundable they expressed interest in. Thank you so much for your interest in our vocational training program as well. Our budget for that program next year, which is going to serve 2,000 homeless veterans and help give them the job skills they need to get back into the workforce and back on their feet, that budget is $250,000 next year. Does that sound like something that the foundation would be interested in underwriting, or would a $125,000 request be more appropriate? Question mark, pause. Right? They're the next person that speaks. And again, if they give you a range, you just listen for the high end of it. And the idea here is that hopefully based on your research, you have a sense of what size grants they give out. You actually intentionally want to overshoot that by a little bit. The number on the bottom end of your range should be about 15 to 25% above the high end of their range. And then your higher number is a little bit above that. And the reason is you want to intentionally overshoot so that when they come back and they give you a range, it includes the highest number possible. You were looking to maximize the size of the invitation here. So we're repeating that for each of the different fundables. And by the way, if you aren't able to do the research, or if there is no information available as a baseline formula, I would say nobody ever wants to fund 100% of your total budget. So for general operating support, I would invite them to fund a quarter of next year's budget with a fallback of half of that. And for a specific program or initiative, I would invite them to fund the entire thing, next year with a fallback of half of that. And again, that ask includes the impact that their gift would make possible. So that's the dollar amount. And then the final piece, what I call the Jedi Mind-Trick, because it's a little counterintuitive, and I don't quite understand it, but it works so well. It's really impressive. And in fact, I spoke alongside a program officer at a conference who said that she got 800 applications a year for 30 grants that she was able to give out. And of the 30, 20 of them did this Jedi Mind-Trick. And again, it sounds a little counterintuitive, but it goes a little something like this. At the end of your conversation with the program officer, you're going to say something like, well, thank you so much for your interest in providing general operating support and supporting our vocational training program. Happy to get you a proposal. Just one last question for you, Jane. Would you mind reviewing a draft of our proposal before we formally submit it? Would you mind reviewing a draft of our proposal before we formally submit it? And in my experience, they will almost always say yes to that, and yet they will almost never actually do it. So you should assume it's the final draft when you send it in. You should also ask them if they need, that final draft a couple weeks before the public deadline, so theoretically they can look at it, even though they probably won't. If they do, that's great, because ultimately the point of this Jedi Mind-Trick is you want them to adopt your proposal. You want them to have a sense of ownership over your proposal, because I could tell you, as from the perspective of someone who's been on the board of a small grant-making foundation, and I've been in the room when the board was looking at a slate of 10 different grants, and we only had money to give, to support 5 of them. But guess what? Of the 10, 3 of them had champions in the room. 3 of them had advocates from the staff of the board that stood up at the moment of truth and said, here's why I think we should fund this one. And you know what happened? Those grants always got approved, and they almost always got approved for the full amount of money. Nobody wants to burst their bubble. And so for whatever reason, it works that when you ask them to review a draft of your proposal, somehow mentally and emotionally, they are sort of adopting your proposal when they say yes, even though they don't ever do it. And so that when they're in the boardroom and when they're presenting the slate, they stand up and they support the need for your grant. It really does help in a huge way. So, compare and contrast 5% success rate to 50%. 5%, you're doing a lot of research, you're identifying really targeted funding opportunities, you're writing a great targeted custom grant proposal, and then you're sending it in and crossing your fingers. 50%, you're still doing the prospect research, identifying the right prospects, but then you are taking the time and energy to get in the door, to get a call or a meeting, to get invited to apply for a specific program or set of programs and initiatives with the rationale behind each of why they're a fit for them, with a dollar amount behind each, and the program officer has agreed to review a draft of your proposal before you formally submit it. That's what 50% looks like. All right, so let's move into individual donors. And what I want to say here really quickly is, first of all, hopefully some of you have heard of Hank Rosso. He's the gentleman in the middle of this photo in the light suit. He is sort of the godfather of professional fundraising. Started the fundraising school at Indiana University and AFP and a bunch of other stuff. And probably the thing he's most famous for saying is that the number one reason why people don't give is because they're not asked. And so what I want to share is sort of a brief framework for an ask and a conversation with a major donor and an individual donor prospect. And again, all of these are really listed from my new book, Nonprofit Fundraising 101. And what I did there is I interviewed some of the nonprofit sector's best and brightest minds. For the major donor chapter, I interviewed Kay Spinkle-Grace, and I also spoke with Kim Klein for the grassroots fundraising chapter that's also in the individual donor section. And as I talked to them about how to make the optimal ask, this sort of underscores the process I shared with the foundation executive, where you're starting out in the meeting, there's a little bit of small talk, and you're building up a rapport. Then there is this appreciative inquiry phase, and this is even more important with individual donors, because almost always with an individual and a major donor, there is something in their background that was like the moment of truth that really connected them in a very emotional and powerful way to this cause. I was once homeless as a young child. My mother was an art teacher. I was sick with polio, and if it weren't for the vaccine, I never would have been able to walk. Whatever it might be, what you're looking for in the appreciative inquiry process is trying to understand what their emotional connection is and what motivates their giving as it relates to this particular issue. And then based on that, you're able to sort of fine-tune your pitch a little bit and do that pasta test, and talk to them about the different things that you think they may be interested in a way that is, that is customized a little bit based on their interests. And again, you're listening for resonance. You're looking for that tuning fork effect. And once you find it, once you figure out which issue or issues they're most interested in supporting, you're inviting them to join you in supporting that. The old saying is that the most powerful form of ask is a peer ask. And that sounds something like, I invite you to join me in supporting the good work of St. Jude's. In particular, it seems like you're clearly really passionate about eradicating homelessness. And we are launching a vocational training program that is going to equip these homeless folks with the job skills they need to get back into the workforce, to get on their feet, and to pay their own way moving forward. And our budget for that program next year is $500,000. If that is something that you're in a position to consider, that will enable us to help 5,000 homeless people get off the streets and into the workforce. What do you think? Question mark, pause. Right? So we've got a dollar amount, we've got an impact, we've got a question mark, and we've got a pause. So that's a little bit about individual donors. And as we kind of wrap up in the next 15 minutes here, and again, feel free to ask questions if anything isn't crystal clear, let's shift to the online arena. And let's also, this is kind of this transition point because this is something that is critical for success both online and off. But the idea is what I call the Sally Struthers effect in fundraising. For the price of a cup of coffee, this kid is going to stay in school for a year. Or a more modern example is Heifer International. For $50, this family is going to get a hive of bees and they'll have honey and wax. For $100, they'll get a calf and they'll have meat and milk and leather. Right? You're really helping the donor, or rather the prospect, wrap his or her head around what kind of impact they can unlock with a gift of different sizes, right? And the way that Kay Sprinkle Grace put this when I interviewed her for the major donor chapter in the book Nonprofit Fundraising 101 is that people don't give to you, they give through you, right? We are a channel, we are a conduit for impact, and what nonprofits do at their core is we connect people and organizations with resources to the change that they want to see in the world. And so we need to help them sort of operationalize that impact. And although they may understand that for $100,000, which is your overall thermometer fundraising target, you're going to build a new playground at this school, well, if I can only give $100, I want to know that that can pay for a slide, or $500 can pay for the swing or the jungle gym. Right? And that kind of, incremental impact is really helpful in getting donors to actually step up their gifts. And in an online environment, when someone clicks donate on your website, typically what they'll see is, donate $50 and we'll buy 10 used textbooks. Donate $100 and one kid can go to college, etc. And this is really, really helpful from a standpoint of improving donor activity. And I want to kind of dive a level deeper here, because what's interesting is when I interviewed my friends at Network for Good for the online fundraising chapter, this is a group that has raised over $1 billion with a B for nonprofits through their website. And they did a really interesting experiment one day where they turned their donate button from gray to red, and boom, in one instant, they got 30% more online donations. 30%. So we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over time just because they went from gray to red. And the point is, I don't know if gray is your color or red or purple or blue, but the idea is when you are raising money in an online environment, you have direct, immediate, and complete access to the data. You don't have to guess or do a focus group. You look at the numbers and you look at what every single person did after they clicked. And there are 3 really easy experiments that I want to encourage you to do over generally a period of no more than 2 to 3 months. And I will promise you, if you run these 3 experiments, you will at least double your online fundraising results. So these are each what are known as A-B splits, meaning it's a psychology concept, but basically we're going to kind of have a control group and a test group, and we're only testing against one metric, one criteria. So the first experiment you're going to run is basically what Network for Good did. And every few days, you're going to change your donate button. Today it's red, Thursday it's green, Friday it's purple, etc. And you give each different color a few days. You can also play around with the font and with the shape, circle, square, triangle, Maybe we are a bobcat wildlife preservation society, and so our donate button is going to be a bobcat paw, right? Whatever the case may be, you text around, and the idea, again, because we have access to the data, is you don't need to embrace your intuition or your gut. Embrace the data. Look at the numbers using a free tool like Google Analytics, and the only metric you're optimizing against is click-through rate. What percentage of people that come to your website click on the donate button, right? And if the purple bobcat paw is the one that gets a higher click-through rate, well, then that's your new donate button. And now we're getting 40% more people to click on donate. That's great. We've got more traffic going to the donate page. Now, what happens once they see that and once they get on the donate page? That's where they see those different default giving levels. That's what's known as a donation or a gift string. And that's going to be your second experiment. And the only metric you're using in the second experiment, and in fact also on the third, is what is your average online contribution. And I can tell you as a starting point that industry-wide it's $82 for a one-time gift or $22 for a monthly gift. And so the idea is we want to bring that number up over time. And we're going to do it with these two, the second and the third experiment. The first is dialing in exactly what should those default donation levels be. And the thing to know that's most important is almost always the most popular donation level will be the second lowest one. Basically, people don't like to feel cheap, so they'll usually skip the lowest, and they give the one that's second lowest. So that second lowest number is the most important one, and generally speaking, you want to take your average online gift, bump it up by about 25%, and that should be the second lowest one. And usually you're going to want about 4 different donation levels plus other. So as a starting point, if you don't know your average online gift, going with 50, 100, which is about 25% over 82, 88 rather, 50, 100, 250, 500 other is a great starting point. But then you play around and you try 5, 25, 50, 100 other, or you try 100, 250, 500, 1,000 other. And you look at the numbers and you see what gets you the highest average online gift. That's your second experiment. And then the final experiment is the impact associated with each of those giving levels. And you want to try out 3 or 4 different options of what does $100 get me? What does $500 get me? And if you're not the kind of group that is doing clean water or, a soup kitchen where it's as simple as saying, this provides for 2 meals or whatever, you could think of it in terms of staff time. With $100, we could pay 5 hours of staff time. That means we can mentor 3 children. Right? So that's the third experiment. And after about 2 or 3 months, you go through each of these 3 sequentially, and I promise you if you do that, you will at least double your online fundraising results. All right. In terms of online fundraising, the key that you want to keep in mind there is you really need to make the donation process as simple as possible. Now, bear in mind I said the average one-time gift industry-wide is $82, but the average monthly gift is $22. That means that after only 4 months, you're bringing in more money from a monthly donor. The other thing to keep in mind is that a one-time donor is only going to give to you again next year 35% of the time on average, whereas a monthly donor is 85% likely to keep giving into next year. Basically, people are lazy, and whatever takes additional work and action is unlikely to occur. And so if you can lead with a monthly sustaining member option, that is going to work infinitely better for you, plus it's going to help you build up a stable base of income. So step 1, give them the option to give monthly or a fallback of giving a one-time gift. Step 2 in the donation process, you have to collect their information. You want to collect as few pieces of information as possible because according to Commit Change, every single field that you add into the registration process when people go to donate is going to decrease your conversion rate by 2%. So you add 10 additional fields into this, you're going to lose 20% of your audience. You don't want to do that. So as few fields as possible, and then, of course, the payment information. Now, you do need, it is important that you have some kind of online fundraising engine that enables you to take these online donations and that integrates with your website so that it looks and it feels like your site. People aren't clicking donate and then they go to a totally different site with different aesthetics, and that's like going into a store, you've got to buy something and they send you to a different store. People are going to bail. You also want to make sure whatever platform you use, and these are some examples, are mobile compatible. A huge portion of giving now is shifting into mobile. And finally, that it also socializes giving. So in addition to offering the monthly functionality and all the stuff I talked about, after someone actually does make a gift, on the thank you page, instead of just simply saying thank you, have a nice day, no, you're saying thanks for giving, click here to share on Facebook or click here to share on Twitter. And when people do click, up pops a pre-populated message saying, I just gave to TopNonprofits and you should too, click here to support their good work. Simply by adding that functionality on the thank you page after people donate, on average, you're going to generate twice as many online donations. So that functionality is absolutely critical. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to share a secret tip that is going to get each and every one of you a $120,000 grant with only about 1 or 2 hours of time. So I'm not sure if all of you have already heard about Google Grants, but this is kind of one of the best kept secrets in the nonprofit space. And all you have to do is go to google.com/grants. You can also go to google.com/nonprofits to see a bunch of other things that they offer to nonprofits for free or at a big discount, like Google Analytics for free to assess your website traffic and flow. But Google Grants are awesome because basically Google will give you $10,000 a month of free advertising on Google AdWords. That's the auction engine that they use so that whenever someone searches for something, you see the promoted links at the top of the results. Well, those promoted links are decided based on an auction. I'm willing to pay $5 a click. You're only willing to pay $2 a click. I'm going to be on top. Right? So they'll give you $10,000 a month, not of cash that you could take to the bank, but of credit that you can use or lose on that Google AdWords auction platform. So this is a $120,000 ad budget for your nonprofit. They are incredibly generous. The program works in over 60 countries. Really, the only 2 restrictions I've seen are that you cannot be fiscally sponsored, nor can you be a religious group. But other than that, they almost never say no. You do need to spend an hour or 2 applying. You need to spend maybe 3 hours getting set up in the system, including brainstorming with your team to come up with a list of 200 or 300 keywords. And you should keep in mind the one big restriction on this program is you cannot bid more than $2 per keyword. So that means, you're probably not going to get homelessness. You're going to need to come up with what are called long tail keywords like homeless shelters in Minneapolis, right? Longer and more specific phrases that on the plus side are going to deliver more targeted traffic to you. On the downside, they're going to deliver less of it. So that's why you need 200 or 300 phrases like that. And ultimately, what a Google Grant can do is it can drive a lot more traffic to your site, which includes online donations. On average, for every 1,000 people you get to your site, you're going to get another $612 of income for your cause. And so Google Grants is a really great opportunity. I would also recommend you budget and sort of expect to put in another 2 to 3 hours a quarter just to optimize that campaign in order to continue to maximize the results. And with that, I do want to leave a little bit of room for some questions. You've got my personal email and mobile phone on the screen here. Again, I am happy to email out a free template of the board member agreement and the board matrix. I also am very happy to do pro bono work, so I'm always willing to have an initial conversation with nonprofits to find out a little bit more about what they're struggling with, hopefully point them in the direction of some resources. And then if I can be more helpful, I do also offer executive coaching and professional consulting, typically with a fundraising and a board development focus. And so we'll give folks a little bit of time to chime in with some questions. I think we've got one here.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah.
It looks like Merv
I got a little clarification.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, Darian, go ahead.
So Merv and anybody else that wants the templates, if you can please email me. You've got my email on the screen. I'm happy to send those out. Absolutely. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Amy.
No, not at all. Thank you. So please, if you would like, you can even access Darian's email in that bio. There's a link to it as well, so you can email him directly and request those sheets, the matrix. So thank you. That's awesome. There's a question from Veronica, and maybe you can answer this question and give folks some time to get in additional questions. Thank you. Veronica wanted to know, there was a phrase you used earlier, with regard to requesting from individual donors. So how did you phrase that exactly? She was looking for the exact phrasing. And it was, I invite you to join me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, the exact wording can vary, but the two key parts of the phrase that you really want in there are the word invite and the word join me. So in general with fundraising, if it's not okay for people to say no, then you're not doing it right. Think of fundraising as throwing a party, and not everybody's going to come, and that's okay, but the act of fundraising fundamentally is about helping that other person or organization get a better sense of how they want to change the world, sharing your work, and if there's an overlap, then they will naturally want to support it. And so that's where the key of invitation comes from. It's not a mandate. It's not a request. It's an invite. And join me is all about that clear ask. I'm not asking you to do anything I haven't done myself. So what I said in that example was, I invite you to join me in supporting the good work of TopNonprofits. I just donated to their annual campaign, and you should too. Here's the link. Right? So again, I'm asking you to do something I've already done, and I'm not even asking you, I'm just inviting. So I hope that's helpful, Veronica. And I know that we're at the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's schedule. So you do have my personal mobile phone and my email here. Feel free to contact me for the free templates, or if anybody wants a pro bono coaching session or wants to talk about other opportunities. And just in general, I really want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And I want to thank you not only on behalf of myself and not only on behalf of Amy and the team at TopNonprofits, but I want to thank you on behalf of the thousands of people that you collectively serve. It's really been an honor to be with you today, and I hope, again, that you're leaving not only inspired, but inspired to action. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Darian. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Couldn't say it any better.